Welcome to the EchoCast. I am Bon, and this is a podcast about video game news, speculation, reviews, and whatever else I feel like chatting about. This week, we'll be talking about Ubisoft Star Wars news, controversial new GPUs, Starfield coming soon-ish, and much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and if you're on Spotify or iTunes, please rate the show. On YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment with your thoughts, your own opinions, or to just say hello down below. A huge thanks to supporter level patrons PK, The Dawn, and Caged Nephilim, as well as producer level patron Hassan. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes, please check out patreon.com/bondiesel. You can get in at the $1, $5, or $10 tier, each with their own unique perks. Okay, let's get into the gaming news. First, we'll start off with Ubisoft Star Wars. Information was maybe teased and then pulled back. So Julian Garrity, who's the creative lead, the creative director, or the overall director of the next Star Wars game that is actually coming from Ubisoft this time, put out a tweet basically saying 2023 is going to be a great year for our team, which led to rampant speculation. Go figure, who could have thunk it? Now, if you don't know who Julian Garrity is, he previously was the creative director on The Division 1 and 2. He's also a really long time Ubisoft employee. I believe before The Division 1, he was at Ubisoft and essentially was like a closer. I don't know if they still do this at Ubisoft, but in the past, Ubisoft basically had people who would go to studios in the last 6 months of their development of a game before release, and they have people go basically make sure everything is happening, that it's gonna get finished in that time. I'm fairly certain that was his old position. Then he did the Division games, and now he's on Star Wars. So then the next day, after that tweet, after people like myself, and I'm sure lots of others made videos like, oh, Ubisoft Massive's new Star Wars game is coming this year, because that's definitely what it implied. Julian made the expected tweet of, hey, I was just saying, this is going to be a fun year for our team, and if you want to join, we're hiring. So that's funny for a few reasons. The first one being that I really love the Division 1 and 2, but they always had like a hype issue where they're, especially Division 1, but it happened in 2 as well, where the devs or the comm devs or whoever would like kind of like, oh man, the next state of the game, which was like a weekly live stream they did to update, to talk about what's going on with the game. They'd be like, oh man, the next day of the game is going to be a real banger. And so people would be like, oh, dope, we're going to get new guns, a new map, a new mode. Like, that's so exciting. And then it would be, the next week would come and they'd be like, we updated our server infrastructure. It's so exciting. And people would be upset because while that may be exciting for the people who work on the game, for the people who play it, it wasn't. So, this isn't out of the left field, if this was kind of some false hype for Julian. But either way, things are happening with that Star Wars game. I'm very excited for that Star Wars game, both for reasons I can and can't say out loud. For reasons I can is just because the thing that the Division games have struggled with is balance and like the looter aspects of the game. And if this next game really is going to be the open world single player experience it's supposed to be, those things won't matter. And so they can focus on gunplay and mechanics and gameplay feel and the story and interactions with other characters. And I really genuinely believe that starting with the Avatar game that's also coming from Massive, and then even more so with the Star Wars game when it comes out. Massive is about to establish themselves as we are right up there with any of the biggest studios you can think of when it comes to making really great, vibrant, fun single player experiences. My little hope, and for any of my Division fans who still happen to listen to the podcast, my personal hope is that Avatar and especially Star Wars are super successful, and Ubisoft is like, hey, make the Division 3 and make it an open world, story based, maybe not like straight up RPG. Like, I don't want all the goofy magic stuff. Shade Tech pushes that enough. But just make a great story experience. Don't worry about the PvP. Don't worry about the looter stuff. Just make a great game. So we'll have to see what they do. I'm really interested. I don't think the Star Wars game is coming this year. I think next year is more likely. I suspect that this year we get a big blowout of some capacity of seeing footage and gameplay and, starting the hype cycle for the game. I would be pretty surprised if it actually releases. What was sorry, I had to yawn. What was interesting about his tweet was that he tweeted that, and the official Star Wars account, the Ubisoft account, the Ubisoft Massive account, none of them posted anything. And typically when there's like a marketing push, they all do it. So my guess is Julian sent that tweet, and then the next day someone above was like, hey, don't do that. like you're revealing information like we are releasing it this year and we don't want people to know yet, or Julian, that game's 2 years away. Stop it. Like, you're making people think it's coming tomorrow. So anyways, it's cool to hear something about it. Like I said before, the Avatar game I assume is coming fairly soon. But that's being made by like what is essentially a brand new team at Massive. The Star Wars game is being worked on what is essentially the Division 2 team. That almost entirely all moved to that game. The people currently working on Division 2 are a few of the old devs on the original release, but are they're essentially making a new team for that game. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what the Star Wars game looks like from Ubisoft, specifically from Massive, and yeah, our wait may not be that long, but we'll have to wait and see. The 4070 Ti graphics card has been officially announced. If you don't pay a lot of attention to the PC hardware space, this is a fairly controversial thing because a few months ago they announced the 4080, which was a higher tier card, but they announced two versions of it, and one had less RAM than the other one and was downclocked. And people were like, wait a second. Like, why are you releasing a new card, but releasing two versions of it where one of them is significantly slower, but not that much cheaper? And then I think they eventually were like, oh, our bad. That was actually supposed to be a 4070. So we just won't sell it. So they unannounced basically a graphics card, which to my knowledge never happened before, like in the hardware space. And then in the months since, it seems like they've basically rebranded those cards, put new stickers on them, put them in new boxes, because apparently they had like thousands and thousands of them produced already, labeled as 4080s. So now it's coming out, and it's interesting. So it's called the 4070 Ti. So there will probably be a 4070 at some point. It'll be a little bit slower, but it's still really expensive. Like the 1070 Ti, the 2070 Ti, and even the 3070 cards were like reasonably expensive, at least at MSRP. And this one, they're just like, oh, well, it's just things are more expensive now, people. I'm sorry. Where it's almost twice as expensive as the old cards when they came out. So it's it's weird because it's not a bad card, but at the price it's being sold, it's not great. And what happened was during the pandemic, due to shortages, and because that was just happened to also be when the NFT and but especially the crypto mining thing got really big, and you couldn't find any GPUs, let alone high end ones. The companies got greedy and realized they can sell their hardware for a lot more, and now everyone is waiting and hoping that it won't work and that they'll realize that they need to pull back, but they probably won't because, as far as I know, these cards are still selling okay. And if they can, if they sell half the cards at twice the price, they aren't really losing money. So it's a bummer. I was always I'm always like one generation behind on tech. So like I have a 3060 Ti. I'm probably rocking that probably until the 4060 Ti is old, right? I feel like with PC gaming, and you can stay like one step behind and still be perfectly fine and save a ton of money. So I'm not interested in this. I'm sure people are gonna buy it. It just doesn't seem like it's worth it, especially when you have Nvidia themselves, the people who make these this line of cards, basically saying like the 30 series is for most consumers, and these 40 series cards are for enthusiasts. So I don't know. I don't. I'm not too worried about right now, but I do feel for people who are trying to build a brand new PC right now. Stuff is available more so than it used to be, but it's still really expensive. I suspect my entire rig is about the cost of a decent GPU at this point, and that's a bummer. That's not how it should be. We got some Starfield news, specifically from a Bethesda FAQ, I believe, where it's highly suggested at this point that Starfield will come out in the first half of 2023. As you know, this game was supposed to come out in 11/11/22 last summer. I believe it was like right before the Xbox show. They announced that it was getting delayed until 2023, and we haven't heard much since then. They've shown us a few like little like info videos and question and answer videos from the devs. The kind of Xbox, really well-known Xbox stands right now are pushing it pretty hard, that they're hearing from like QA people who are playing the game that it's really, really good, and that they're excited. You can only take so much from that. But this is my most anticipated game right now. In theory, you could say the Mass Effect game is, but that game's like 3 or 4 years away, so I'm not super worried about it yet. But yeah, this is exciting. I've talked about it a few times, but Fallout 76 was like a weird like spin-off project for Bethesda, but so many people are being like, well, if they could make that, then the next game's gonna suck. But I really think that's discounting Bethesda's like legacy, and the game's probably not going to run great. It's probably gonna have lots of bugs, and it's probably gonna be really, really good. And so I'm excited for that. I just can't wait. I can't wait. I'm so excited. I'm hoping it can fill that Mass Effect gap for a couple of years while we all wait for that next game to come. In other news related to Bethesda, specifically with ZeniMax, who is now owned by Microsoft and owns Bethesda, as well as other studios, their QA, 300 plus employees, have voted to start a union. That's a big deal because it's the first test of Phil Spencer and Xbox, who had previously said, we'll be neutral. If people start a union, we'll recognize it, we'll negotiate with them. So they aren't really going out there and starting unions for fun, but that they'll acknowledge them. A lot of people believe this is kind of a ploy for like the FTC, for them to look like the good guys, to look like they aren't trying to be non-competitive, things like that. And so it's probably one of those things where they're making a business decision, but it's a business decision that also happens to help people, which tends to be fairly rare. So I'm proud of them. I think if there's a single group of people in gaming development who especially need a union, QA or quality assurance people are the ones. These are the people who are testing games, sending bug reports up to the devs to be fixed before a game even comes out and such. And just imagine being a QA person for Bethesda, of all places. So I think that's a really good thing. I'm not super knowledgeable. I'm not knowledgeable enough on unions to be one who's like, you should go unionize. Like, I try to stay out of some of that stuff that I don't know enough about. But this seems like it's a good thing. It seems like the games industry especially is one that could hand some of the power over to the employees so that they're being taken care of appropriately. So it seems like that's what's happening here, and I think that's a good thing. The day before, oh, you sweet, sweet summer child who may or may not actually exist. The day before was a game that a couple of years ago really broke onto the scene, especially in the Division community. It looks like this mishmash of the Division and The Last of Us and some other kind of grungy survival zombie games. This one specifically really impressed with at a first glance appeared to be these really glamorous, really high fidelity trailers. Now, if you take a closer peek, the illusion fades pretty quickly. But this game's been through a bunch of weird situations. They've released a few quote unquote gameplay trailers that really haven't been gameplay. They've just been like really obviously like catered experiences that they recorded. This game just seems fake. It just doesn't seem real. They've delayed it multiple times. They've claimed that they're going to show footage, and they haven't. Like, we're yet to see someone playing the game. We've seen cinematics or just trailers or just gameplay footage, but it's all been like highly catered and set up and is not like natural gameplay, which we're still yet to see. They have really, really obvious kind of ripped off the Division's aesthetic and even some of the locations and stuff. This studio is some weird studio in like Siberia in Russia that they've only made like mobile games before, and even those have been kind of weird situations. I normally I wouldn't care about something like this. It's just another survival early access game on Steam. Those are, a dime a dozen. But this one specifically is obviously really targeting the Division community. And I've seen some people get real weird about being like, this game looks amazing. And it doesn't. The animations look bad. A lot of the stuff that basically anything that isn't like hand tailored in these trailers looks kind of mediocre. And I just, it's a curiosity. I've been very curious about what happens with this game. I think we all know where it's going, but let's all sit back for the ride and just kind of see how it goes, I guess. But if you're excited about the day before, let me know down in the comments. I'm curious to what people what people think who are excited about this game, despite what we've seen from the trailers and a lot of the kind of weird communication and stuff. Just a little bit of Xbox acquisition news of Activision. Basically, I think it's the CTA in the UK has basically pushed back hearings and stuff. So in theory, they've delayed the proceedings. I still think this Activision deal is happening. Maybe they'll have to chop off a few subsidiaries. Maybe they'll have to take some concessions, but I just don't see Xbox backing down at this point because I don't think they should. And the funny thing is if the Sony reps and lawyers and stuff hadn't have made the whole situation so personal, I wouldn't be surprised if Xbox would have pulled out already. But instead, they're sticking around, and we'll have to wait and see what comes of that. I suspect that deal still closes by the end of this year. So for Madden players, there's a pretty bummer of a situation that came up in the last couple of weeks. They found that a bunch of their saves had been deleted from the cloud, And now EA has come out and said that they think that up to 60% of people's saved games on the EA Madden 23 save or game has been wiped out. Not good. People take those franchises and stuff really seriously. And now it appears that more than half of the players are going to permanently lose a bunch of their progress and rosters and tunes and all of that. So it's a bad look for Madden. It was like kind of funny. I saw some videos being like, oh, EA added again. And like EA's been pretty fine for a while. They're not great. They're still pushing some dumb stuff. Like, I'm not sitting here trying to be like, EA is perfect, stop making fun of them. But it definitely is weird that you can tell, like, in that one video I saw with some older creators, and there's two of them, and you could tell they're just being like grumpy old men about Amazon. It just seems like it was probably an honest mistake. But we'll have to wait and see. Okay, Fable has been rumored over the last couple of weeks. People have been saying that they are dropping the Forza engine, that they're going to do it on Unreal Engine 5, that they are restarting development, blah blah blah. And then the devs and some notable people came out and were like, no, that's not what's happening. The Fable game is moving along. It's using the same engine. It's all good. And kind of squashed it. Now, it's always a conundrum because very often such accusations are unfounded. They're being made up by someone who just wants to get some clicks on Twitter or on YouTube. But they don't come from nowhere typically. So maybe Fable is having some trouble using that Forza engine. If you think about games like Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda over at EA, when they tried to use the Frostbite engine for RPGs, it didn't work out very well. So you have to imagine that in some capacity, trying to use an engine that's only been used for racing games to make Fable, maybe a little difficult, and they could run into some issues that may take some time and lead to delays and stuff. But the best part about Fable is it can't be delayed because we don't have a date for it. So I'm sure this whole thing is going to be fine. It definitely seems like slow news day stuff or creator desperately trying to be relevant stuff. The last one here is CES is happening right now. It's a big giant electronic show where they all the big boys show off all their new tech. And PlayStation was actually there with Sony. And one thing that they showed off that was pretty interesting was a new accessibility controller. Now, if you remember a year or two, maybe more ago, time is just a concept. Xbox put out an accessibility controller as well. And it was, a part of my job is working with people with cerebral palsy. And the Xbox One is like perfect because it's pretty basic. Everything's big. And it's very expandable with things that people who have some type of physical disability typically have around. Well, this will interface with most of it. The Sony one is interesting. The Sony one almost looks like, and forgive my language here, that it's more meant for like higher functioning people. The Xbox controller looked like it was going to be really, really friendly to people who had like pretty major like fine motor skill issues that like maybe even to a point have like just mobility issues in general, especially with their arms. Where the Sony one looks, it's so pretty. And I'm curious how functional it is. Now, I know people like Steve Spawn and various other, known disabled gamers had a voice in this and took a part of it. So even though I think it doesn't look super useful for someone with those kind of issues, people who have those issues were on the consultation board of this product and they sign off on it. So the thing about disabilities though is that no two disabilities, they may have the same diagnosis name, they may have the same ICD-10 code or whatever, but they're very rarely, if ever, have like really similar experiences. So having different options for controllers. It's a real shame that like Nintendo, Sony, and Xbox couldn't all get together and be like, hey, let's make an accessibility controller that will work with all of our systems, and then we'll keep trying to do better with the accessibility options in the menu. But that's not what has happened. I suspect Nintendo will never put out something like this, but we may see a little bit more in the future from PlayStation and Xbox. And I've always wondered, like that Xbox, that Sony one, just looks like it's just right for someone to take it apart and make something crazy with it. So I want to see someone make, I want to see someone beat Elden Ring with like a disable, with like a taken apart controller on the end of a stick or something. I don't know. Okay, well, that's the news for this week. We do have a couple listener questions. If you have any questions for the podcast, please ask in the Discord, reply to my tweets on Twitter. You can comment in the YouTube video. I've also got a Discord and a Patreon that you can come and comment on as well. This week we have 3 questions from Master Prime. First, how much time do you give the current generation of consoles? This has been a little bit of a discussion right now. If, say, a general, let's see, we went from, 2013 or 14, so about 6 to 8 years. I would say we're going to be on the deep end of that, probably 8 years, because they want time to sell through those consoles. And the first couple of years of the release of these consoles, it was during the pandemic, during the worst parts of it. And so no one, so there's not a whole lot of maybe an upgrade path once stock gets in. We've heard from Ryan over at Sony that they feel like the shortage is over, that if you want a PlayStation 5 now, you will get one. And that there's not really a question there. I believe we're getting to the same spot with the Series X and the Series S. The Series S has been pretty available for a while. So this current gen, my big prediction is that we will get a PlayStation 6 around like 2028, maybe. I don't know if we will get more Xboxes, like in the sense of like the next generation of Xbox. I think that they will release mid-gen refreshes indefinitely and just bump up the specs every time. And then on the other side of it, they'll just start lopping off consoles that are like 2 gens old from new games. And I saw someone say that they wouldn't do that, but they can, because if they are really pushing this Game Pass and the game streaming, then there's no reason. A big thing that's going to be nice is that the original Xbox One will be able to play Series X and S exclusives using the Game Pass streaming app. And they're specifically tailoring an experience for if you're on an old console and you want to play new games that aren't available, you can use Game Pass live streaming to play it over, a stream. It's not going to be as good as it would be if it was actually on your PC or on your Xbox, but it's still going to be really good. And so, I would say another 5 to 6 years is realistic in general for the current generation of systems. A second question from Master Prime: is reusing assets lazy or just a way of saving time? Just a way of saving time. It can be ridiculous. Like in Mass Effect 1, every dungeon that you go into has like essentially the same equipment in it. It has to be used with discretion. Like you never want to see 2 civilians on the street of a game who look exactly the same, right? But a really good example is Mass Effect 3, where during the opening sequence, below the player, there's thousands of people running away from this big attack that's happening. But if you zoom in, you'll find that it's one of your squad mates, and it's just a 2D like GIF of them running, and it's like pixelated. It looks terrible, but you never notice it because the way they do it in the game, they never draw attention to it. It's just there. And if you happen to see it, that's really cool. If you figure out what it is, that's cool in its own way, I guess. But no, I don't think it's lazy. I think it's smart, personally, to reuse assets. What makes you give a game a second chance? For the most part, and this is the final question from Master Prime, it's mostly playing something and being like, I want to like this, I just don't. And then seeing other people enjoy it. And so then I'll go back. I want to say like No Man's Sky was like that, as well as a few other games. Yeah. So basically, I need to have some interest in it first. And even if it kind of lets me down, maybe I give it some time and go back, which is what I've tried to do with other games, and it just never vibed with me. So it's kind of a to each their own situation. I didn't have any polls to talk about this week for content updates. I did an interview with Mr. Holthen. He's a pretty prominent Mass Effect creator, and we had a really nice chat. So that's over on the YouTube page if you're on the podcast, or if you're on YouTube right now watching this, it's right here. If you go back to my main page, it should be one of the first videos that you can find. I also released a video on Thursday about a piece of Mass Effect concept art from the most recent N7 day that I think is Omega, but I also don't think it is. And so if you check out my video, I'll explain it much better, and you can let me know what you think, if you think that that art is from Omega or not. The final thing here is I've been playing lots of Tarkov. I've still been playing Mass Effect. I plan on streaming both. I think I've done an okay job so far of streaming a bit more than I have recently in recent months, and I want to keep that up. So I'm going to need to mix it up for Mass Effect eventually. I can only play it so many times, or I at least need to take a break. And so far that hasn't really happened. But I would be curious to maybe check out some other stuff as well to try to keep it fresh. And that's all I have. So enjoy your weekend. Thank you so much for listening, or enjoy your week if you're listening to this later. I really, really appreciate you listening. These solo podcasts can be tough. I think I mentioned it before. I'm just talking to myself, or really I'm talking to you. So please interact with me when it comes to the podcast. You can interact with me on Twitter at Bondiesel, or the EchoCast has its own account. So at the EchoCast, you can reach out to me on the YouTube comments, in my Discord, in my Patreon, on Instagram, for all I care. But just interact, because the more I hear from you, the more I can give back feedback or questions or topics to talk about. The more of that I get, the more I can put out, and it makes it feel like we're having a back and forth, which is what I want. So please do that if you can. Also, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're on Spotify or iTunes, please rate the podcast. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment down below, even if it's just to help out the algorithm, and just say hello. You can find me all over the internet as Bondiesel, including on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and over on Twitch. If you're interested in supporting the show and my other content, as well as getting ad-free episodes of this podcast, please check out patreon.com/Bondiesel. You can get on a $1, $5, or $10 tier. And that's all I have. So until next time.